A case over 60 years old has finally come to a close. The person who murdered Mary Teresa Simpson in 1964 has been identified in a news conference today with the Elmira Police Department. 18 News reporter Imran Ahmed shares more on the killer and how forensic science was used to identify him.
This DNA evidence establishes that the identified individual was directly involved with Mary Teresa Simpson at or near the time of her death. Alfred Murray Jr. was born in Elmira, New York in 1931. He lived and worked in this community, raised a family here.
Linda Galpin, who is Simpson's older sister, never thought she'd see closure to this case.
Right now, I do feel very happy that it finally got solved after almost 62 years. It's going to take me a little while for it to sink in.
Before we continue, a warning. This case involves the murder of a child and details that may be distressing. Viewer discretion is advised. We tell this story with care, respect, and a commitment to the facts. For 62 years, no one could name the man who killed 12-year-old Mary Teresa Simpson. Not her parents, not her sister, not the police department that kept her evidence frozen for decades, not the hundreds of people interviewed in 1964. The answer was there, but it was almost too small to save. In November of 2022, a lab technician in Texas was handed a vial containing 0.4 of a nanogram of DNA. 0.4 of a nanogram, an amount so small you cannot see it, smaller than a grain of pollen. It had been extracted from evidence stored for decades in a freezer at a small-town police department in upstate New York. That vial was packed in dry ice and shipped by the FBI to a forensic genealogy lab. Then the storm hit. A historic ice storm shut down the FedEx hub in Memphis, Tennessee, where the package had been routed. Inside that closed facility, somewhere among thousands of stranded shipments, was the last remaining trace of a man who had escaped justice for more than 6 decades. If the dry ice ran out, the sample could degrade. If the sample degraded, the name might be lost forever. FBI agents went into the hub and searched for it themselves. And when they found it, they were not just recovering a package, they were recovering the last chance to answer a question one family had carried since 1964. Who killed Mary Teresa Simpson? This is Final Trace. The cases that do not end when the file closes. At around 7 o'clock on the evening of March 15, 1964, a friend saw 12-year-old Mary Teresa Simpson walking home on the east side of Elmira, New York. That was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. Mary Teresa was the youngest of 4 children. Her parents, Ellsworth and Rose Simpson, had separated the year before. By March of 1964, Mary was moving between 2 homes in the way children sometimes do after a separation. A visit with one parent, then the other, then back into the ordinary rhythm of school, family, errands, cousins, and neighborhood streets. That Sunday looked ordinary. Mary left her father's apartment at around 3 in the afternoon. She stopped at her mother Rose's home and stayed for about an hour. Then she left again, exactly as planned, to visit her cousin. Nothing about that day announced itself as the kind of day a family would replay for the rest of their lives. No one knew they were watching the last hours. No one knew that a walk through Elmira would become the beginning of a case that would outlive both of Mary's parents. By 10:30 that night, Mary had not come home. Her father called police. At that moment, it was still a missing child case. A girl was late. A family was scared. There was still room for hope. 4 days later, that hope ended on a road 7 miles outside the city. On the morning of March 19, 1964, a hiker and his 2 sons were walking off Combs Hill Road. The area was about 7 miles from Elmira. There, under branches, dirt, and leaves, they found what someone had tried to hide: Mary Teresa Simpson's body. She had been covered, weighted down with 4 stones. The largest was close to 110 pounds. The Chemung County Medical Examiner determined that Mary Teresa had died by asphyxiation from strangulation. There was evidence of sexual assault. At the scene, investigators recovered items that would later become central to the case: a pair of cat-eye glasses, a fan club card, buttons from her blouse, her clothing. Those items were placed into a freezer at Elmira Police Headquarters. Not for days, not for months, for decades. At the time, no one could have known what that decision would mean. In 1964, DNA testing did not exist as a tool for police. Forensic genetic genealogy was not even imaginable. But the evidence was preserved, frozen, waiting, while the person responsible disappeared back into ordinary life. The case immediately became a homicide investigation. Police began looking for the man who had killed a 12-year-old girl. They searched the community. They followed tips. They interviewed hundreds of people, but the man they needed was not among them. And that is where the case began to fail. If you value true crime stories told with care, facts, and respect for the people behind the case, subscribe to Final Trace. We're building this channel, one case at a time. By October of 1964, investigators had interviewed more than 300 people. More than 300. Neighbors, possible witnesses, people in the area, anyone who might know something. None of those interviews produced a viable suspect. A reward was offered, $1,000, funded by Whelm Radio and the Star Gazette. By 1972, that reward had grown to $5,000. It was never collected. But somewhere near Elmira, only miles from where Mary Teresa's body had been left, there was a man investigators did not interview. He was 32 years old, a truck driver. A man with a documented history involving children that went back to when he was 17. That history included a prior arrest for molesting two 7-year-old sisters. And yet, in 1964, he was not one of the 300 people questioned. He was not brought in, not confronted, not asked where he had been on March 15th, not asked whether he knew Mary Teresa, not asked anything at all. He kept living in the same area. He aged, he worked, he had a family, he died. And for more than 60 years, no one connected his name to the evidence waiting inside that freezer. This is one of the hardest parts of a cold case to understand. Sometimes the answer is not across the country. Sometimes it is not hidden behind a criminal mastermind. Sometimes the answer is nearby, living quietly, going unnoticed, waiting for science to catch up. But before science could give Mary Teresa's family a name, it had to fail them several times first. For decades, Mary Teresa's case sat in the space where old murder investigations often go, not forgotten, but trapped. There were detectives who cared. There were family members who kept asking. There was evidence preserved inside police headquarters, but there was no tool powerful enough to turn that evidence into a name. Then, in 2000, the first major break came. Mary Teresa's clothing was sent to the New York State Police Forensic Investigation Center. Technicians developed a DNA profile from semen recovered from her blouse. For the first time, the case had a scientific trace. Not a rumor, not a witness memory, not a theory, a profile. That profile was entered into CODIS, the National DNA Database. And then the answer came back. No match. 3 years later, in 2003, more clothing was tested. A skirt, underwear. The DNA profile was confirmed and strengthened. It went into CODIS again. Still no match. In 2014, the profile was submitted again. One more search. One more chance. Still nothing. That is the cruelty of DNA evidence. It can be powerful. It can be precise. It can survive time in ways human memory cannot. But DNA alone does not give you a name. It gives you a profile. And if the person behind that profile is not already in the database, the science reaches a wall. Mary Teresa's killer had left a trace, but not a name. And the man investigators would eventually identify had never been arrested for a crime that placed his DNA inside CODIS. So for years, the profile waited. The evidence was speaking. The database simply did not know who it was. Then, in 2022, a new kind of search began. And it all came down to a sample so small the lab almost did not have enough to work with. In 2022, Elmira Police Sergeant William Goodwin secured a grant from a non-profit called Season of Justice. The grant paid for advanced forensic testing in Mary Teresa's case. What remained of the DNA sample was sent to Othram Technologies, a forensic genetic genealogy company in the Woodlands, Texas. By then, the sample had been reduced to roughly 0.4 of a nanogram, among the most degraded material the lab had ever processed. Think about that. A murder investigation more than 60 years old, a family waiting across generations, a police department trying one more time, and the last physical path to the killer was nearly invisible. Unlike CODIS, forensic genetic genealogy does not require the suspect's own DNA to already be in a law enforcement database. It searches for relatives, distant genetic connections, cousins, branches, shared ancestry. Then investigators build family trees backward and forward until the unknown DNA begins to point toward a person. But first, the sample had to arrive. FBI Special Agent Kenneth Jensen shipped it packed in dry ice. The package was routed through Memphis. Then the ice storm shut down the FedEx hub. For a period of time, the sample was stuck inside a closed facility. Dry ice does not last forever. And if the last usable trace degraded, Mary Teresa's case might remain what it had been for more than 6 decades. Unanswered, agents went into the FedEx hub. They searched, and they found the package before the dry ice ran out. That moment matters, because the case did not turn on a dramatic confession. It did not turn on a witness finally coming forward. It turned on people finding a tiny vial inside a storm-locked shipping facility before time destroyed what little was left. The sample survived the storm. Now it had to survive the science. Othram built a full genetic profile from what remained. Then the FBI's forensic genetic genealogy team began the slow work of turning that profile into a name. This was not instant. There was no computer screen that simply flashed the killer's identity. The first matches were distant, fragments, possibilities, pieces of a family tree. Investigators had to build outward: parents, children, cousins, marriages, obituaries, public records, birth dates, death dates, locations. Every branch had to be checked. Every possibility tested against time, geography, age, and opportunity. In 2023, Dr. Christina Lane, a criminologist at Russell Sage College, joined the effort with a team of students. They helped cross-reference genealogical records and public documents. The work took more than 2 years. 2 more years added to a case that had already waited 6 decades. But eventually, the branches narrowed, not to a theory, not to a type of person, to one name: Alfred Raymond Murray, Jr., the man who had lived near Elmira. The man never interviewed in 1964. The man whose documented history involving children had never placed him in the path of Mary Teresa's investigation. But a family tree is not the same as a final match. Investigators still needed confirmation. Murray had died in 2004, so they turned to someone still living. His surviving son agreed to provide a DNA sample voluntarily. That sample confirmed a familial relationship to the unknown male profile recovered from Mary Teresa's clothing. It was strong, but investigators went further. On November 5, 2025, they exhumed Alfred Raymond Murray Jr.'s remains from an Elmira cemetery. He had been buried only 5 miles from where Mary Teresa's body was found. A direct DNA comparison was run against the original profile. The result came back. It matched. Investigators cited the odds of a coincidental match at less than 1 in 320 billion. After 62 years, the unknown male profile had a name: Alfred Raymond Murray, Jr. But the name came too late for handcuffs, too late for a trial, too late for Mary Teresa's parents, and too late for the courtroom moment most families imagine when they hear the word justice. There would be no arrest, no trial, no verdict. Alfred Murray died in 2004, At the time of his death, police had not connected him to Mary Teresa Simpson. His own family had no reason to connect him to her. The public had no reason to know his name. His obituary ran in the Star-Gazette on March 19, 2004, exactly 40 years to the day after Mary Teresa's body was found. It listed his wife, his children, his grandchildren, his military service in Korea. To anyone reading it, Alfred Murray was a husband, a father, a grandfather, a veteran. Nothing in that obituary connected him to a 12-year-old girl found off Combs Hill Road in 1964, because at that point no one knew. That is what makes cold case resolutions so complicated. A name can be found, a file can be closed, a family can finally receive an answer. But when the person identified is already dead, the justice system cannot do what it was built to do. There is no interrogation, no plea, no cross-examination, no defense, no jury, no sentencing. And because Alfred Murray was never charged or convicted, the language matters. DNA evidence identified him as a match to the profile recovered from the scene. That is what the evidence supports. That is as far as the legal record can go. For Mary Teresa's family, it was not a courtroom victory. It was something quieter. A name finally attached to the person who had remained unknown for 62 years. And for one woman who had never stopped asking, that name arrived after almost a lifetime of waiting. For 61 years, Linda Galpin kept asking. Linda was Mary Teresa's older sister. Year after year, she periodically called police herself. Not because there was always news. Most of the time, there was not. But because someone had to keep asking the question, was there anything new? Had anything changed? Did anyone know who killed her sister? Her parents, Ellsworth and Rose, never got the answer. They both died before investigators identified the DNA match. Rose had been pregnant with another child when Mary Teresa was killed. That means one child was taken from her while another was still waiting to be born. There are losses families survive, and then there are losses that rearrange the entire shape of a family. Mary Teresa's murder was not only the death of a 12-year-old girl, it was the silence that followed every holiday, every birthday she did not reach, every year her parents wondered, every phone call her sister made hoping the answer had finally come. On February 10, 2026, the Chemung County District Attorney's Office announced that the case had been solved. Police called it historic. Investigators described the years of work, the technology, the grant, the genealogy, the DNA. But the most important person in the room was Linda, now 78 years old, the sister who had waited longer than most people live. She said it simply, "I am very happy it's finally ended. I just wish my mum was here." That is the heart of this case. Not the statistics, not the headlines, not even the 1 in 320 billion odds. The heart of the case is a sister getting an answer her mother never lived to hear. Mary Teresa Simpson was 12 years old when she disappeared. Her evidence sat frozen for decades. Her killer's name sat outside the reach of the database. And the last physical trace almost thawed in a Memphis ice storm. But it survived. And because it survived, a family finally heard the name that had been missing from their story since 1964, Alfred Raymond Murray Jr. The case is now cited as the oldest cold case in the country, solved through DNA evidence, and the 18th case in New York State solved using Othram's forensic genetic genealogy process. But for the family, the meaning is simpler than that. A girl who was taken was not forgotten. A sister who kept calling was finally answered. And a sample smaller than a grain of pollen did what 62 years of silence could not. It gave Mary Teresa Simpson her final trace. If you want more cases told with this same care for the facts and the people behind them, subscribe to Final Trace, because facts outlast silence, and some names deserve to be heard, no matter how long it takes.